I'm gonna go over the build that I rode just because there were some things that I absolutely loved about this bike. There were some things that, man, I really could not stand in terms of the build. What's going on, you guys? It's Mo Awesome from Awesome MTV. If you've been following our journeys in the last few videos, you'll notice that we've been riding some different bikes. So for the last week, we've been riding Knolly bikes, specifically the Fugitive LT. A little bit about Knolly. Knolly is a Canadian-based company, and they make bikes that are built to shred and bikes that they want to ride. So really awesome company. Highly recommend checking them out. The bike that we tested specifically was the Fugitive LT. It is a long travel 29er. In the setting that I tried it out, which is the LT version, the Fugitive has 135 mils of travel in the rear, but you can also set this bike up to have 120 mils of travel in the rear just by going with a different shock. So that's some cool knowledge up there, but the way I tested it and Hannah tested as well was 135 mils of travel in the rear and 150 mils up front. So here's what I thought. For the climbing, we didn't do much climbing in the bike park, but we did in the Whistler Valley trails in Squamish as well as the North Shore. The bikes climb surprisingly really well. For being a aluminum frame, so the frames are aluminum, you definitely have this kind of expectation going into it that it might not climb as efficiently. Maybe it'll be heavier than carbon bike. Or also with Knolly bikes, they're definitely known to have a little bit more of a traction optimized suspension design. So they really prioritize traction. So the expectations going into riding one of these bikes is that you're gonna feel a lot of bob and all that. You get none of that. And it wasn't like I was locking out the rear shock. I actually had the shock in the open setting running about 30% sag. And I definitely noticed it was a very efficient climb. And it kind of didn't really make sense with what I expected the bike to be on the downhills and what I got from the downhills, which was a lot of traction. Because as soon as you point it uphills, the efficiency is there, it pedals really well, and it's kind of one of those bikes that you sit on the bike and you can either get out of the saddle and sprint and not feel too much bob, or you can just sit and make your way to the top. The pedaling position was really comfortable. The seat angle is actually somewhat steep, and that helps for those steeper prolonged climbs, and I think that helped out a ton. The pedaling position in terms of when you were seated, very comfortable, and I felt like long climbs were not an issue whatsoever. Felt like I had a very short rear end as well, so switchbacks and all those tight corners weren't a problem, and the traction optimization was there in the initial stroke, so over loose rocks, you definitely felt like the bike stayed planted. So I was definitely surprised at how well this bike climbed. At the same time, there are a few bikes out there that you might get a little bit more efficiency from an out of the saddle pedaling perspective, but this definitely held on and basically stayed at the top of these bikes in the 135 mil pedaling spectrum. So that's my review of the climbing. Let's get into why you guys are here, and that's the downhill. All right, so now for the downhills. This is where I was really interested in how these bikes performed. Canada definitely has a lot of burly terrain, and being a company that prioritizes traction, I feel like, on their bikes, it definitely just met every one of those expectations and actually made me rethink of how a bike should ride on terrain in Canada. So going downhill, you definitely felt like the bikes just really stayed planted to the ground no matter how gnarly or chunky the terrain got. And I was really surprised that a bike with 135 mils of travel did as well over chunkier, burlier terrain. It almost felt like the bikes had a little bit more suspension than they actually had on paper. And that was really nice because 135 mils in Whistler Bike Park definitely, it's not something that you see too much of, but it really felt like in the park, everything held its own. I never really felt too undergun unless I just freaking overshot something by a ton. But for the most part, very active suspension design on the downhills, and the best way I can describe this bike is it's very straightforward. So there's a few bikes on the market that you really have to take time setting up the suspension, because if you're off just by a couple of percent in terms of sag, especially on the rear shock, it'll completely throw off the bike. With these Knollys, it almost felt like it was very straightforward for someone who just wants to take a bike, get on the trails, have fun, have a good time, and not spend all this time tinkering with a couple of extra percents here and there and clicks, even though I really do like tinkering with suspension, but it just felt like a very straightforward, no-nonsense built bike. So I would say in terms of descending, its strengths were definitely traction, staying stable at high speeds. I will say though, cornering, it did very well. The only places where I felt like may not have necessarily been its strongest suit was it didn't have some of the poppiness in and out of corners that you find a little bit more on more DW-ing style bikes. However, I would say that if you're buying this bike and you're picking it over a DW-ing style bike, I'm assuming you're riding somewhere where traction optimization is definitely something you're looking for. So somewhere where the terrain is nice and loose, rock, very chunky, and I think that's where the ability to have so much traction in a 135 mil 29er, or even 120 mil, depending on how you set this thing up, definitely comes into play. So I would say, yeah, traction is definitely a huge plus. May not be the poppiest style of bikes. And also, I want to show you guys one more thing that I really liked about this bike. So if you go in here, you see this 2-position slack mode, and that's going to be the steeper mode. And that basically changes the geometry of the bike slightly. And I will say, a lot of companies try to do this, and I hate the way most companies do it. They'll do this flip chip where you got to completely disassemble everything, and you don't know which way's up, which way's down. This was probably one of the most straightforward adjustments, and you can actually, I found myself actually making the adjustment on the trail. So I would hit a rock slab, get to the top, get my multi-tool out, and I would just pop that bolt out, normal bolt, and just move the shock, put it back in, and now my bike's slacker or steeper depending on how I wanted it. So I thought that was a huge strength of this bike, and it's really cool to kind of have that flexibility in terms of geo, and then also running a different rear shock to get a different travel combo as well. All right, so now that I've gone over how this bike climbs and how this bike descends, I'm gonna go over the build that I rode, just because there were some things that I absolutely loved about this bike. There were some things that, man, I really could not stand in terms of the build, and I'm just going to give my suggestions for how I would build everything up. As always, in the description of this video, I have the entire build and links in the description. Also, if you want to help support the channel and you buy anything from any of those links, it does help the channel. They are affiliate links, so just kind of giving you guys disclosure. But yeah, let's go over the build. All right, so for the first thing I'm going to talk about is the suspension. So it's got a Lyric up front with the charger dampener, and it has this RockShox Super Deluxe rear shock on there. I'm not the biggest fan of RockShox suspension. I've never really been the biggest fan. They always kind of feel like forks that just do okay. And if you're looking for suspension that's gonna feel pretty good, but you wanna save a little bit of money as well, it is a route that you can go, but I just felt like the fork wasn't really that stiff. In terms of traction, I've definitely ridden forks in the past that have a little bit more suppleness and traction and stiffness overall. So full disclosure, we do ride for DVO suspension, so I am a little bit biased towards their stuff, but I would even say when comparing this to Fox, I would hands down take the Fox suspension. Also say this, that even though we do ride for DVO, I'm a huge fan of that suspension. I think it feels really well. I think it's stiff. I have a video coming out about why we like DVO suspension, but we also have a coupon code AWESOMEMTB, and that will get you guys 15% off some DVO suspension. So if you want to save some money, try some out, that's a cool way to go. If you guys are like, Mo, you're a sponsored rider, we don't believe your opinion, take my opinion between Fox and RockShox. I would go Fox night and day. I think the Fox 36 is a drastically better fork than the RockShox Lyric with the charger dampener. That's just my personal opinion. Same thing with the rear shock. I think the DPX2 would do a lot better than the Super Deluxe, as well as the X2 as well. Or you can go DVO and try a variety of suspension from them. Like I said, feel free to message me if you want my opinion on DVO. So that's for the suspension. In terms of these brakes right here, if Hannah's gonna pan in, these are the code R's. And I will say this, changed my opinion of SRAM brakes. So before I had ridden a majority of my riding on SRAM brakes on the Guide series, I felt like SRAM dropped the ball with the Guide series. I didn't really feel like they had adequate stopping power or heat shedding capabilities. With these codes, I ran into little to no issues in terms of them overheating. I felt like they had plenty of stopping power, a ton of modulation. Yes, they don't have that on-off feeling that Shimano brakes offer, but I will say these are also the code R's. So this is the lower end code series. So that says a lot, that I was truly blown away by this brake. And I mean, I think it's their more cost-effective code option. So huge props to SRAM for the code R brakes. In terms of the wheels, these are the Spank, I believe they call them the Uzis, I believe. Wasn't the biggest fan of this wheel set. I didn't really feel like in terms of stiffness, They were stiff enough for what the bike wanted to do. These Knollies are plenty stiff. You put on a wheel set with a little bit of flex on there and you can definitely feel it. So I personally probably would want to run something a little bit stiffer, a little bit more durable. They are their a little bit narrower rim as well though. So it might be that I might have to retest these, but for the handlebars, it comes with these Chromag aluminum handlebars. I'll put the exact models in the description. I will say these had a really good sweep to them, and if they're an aluminum handlebar and the price point, I'm gonna guess right now if it is, I would say like 70 bucks, I would say really good bang for buck, because I was a huge fan of the sweep. They didn't hurt my wrist and I felt like they did really well. Same thing with the grips. These are Chromag grips as well. I'll put a link in the description. I thought this model in particular, I'm gonna see if they put them on. They don't put the model on here, but I'll put it in the description. I felt like in terms of riding with no gloves, it did really well. I didn't feel like my hands slipped, and I felt like they had an adequate amount of traction. They're also a little on the thinner side, and that's something I prefer in a grip, so I get a little bit more feedback from the bike as well. Tires are the Maxxis Minion DHF. I love these tires. I would probably run a 2.5 on my bike, front and rear, just because I felt like the bike just needs a little bit more rubber because it really wants to go fast down that chunk, and yeah, that's how I would set mine up. Drivetrain is just a GX Eagle drivetrain with an X01 carbon crank. The carbon crank was killer. It definitely felt nice and stiff. The GX Eagle did really well. I still think that I'm leaning towards Shimano 12-speed. I feel like that just shifts a little bit smoother. And now you have Shimano XT 12-speed, so that might be another thing for you to consider. Also came with these 1-up, I believe these are the composite pedals. So this is actually their more cost-effective pedal. And I will say that truly blown away, because I think like MSRP is like 50 bucks. I'm gonna confirm that. But if that's true, like that's an amazing bang for buck wheel set, because I never really felt like my pedals were an issue. And compared to their aluminum pedals, I would say I actually even like them a little bit more. So I don't know, there was just something about them that felt really well. I think it's because the bushing wasn't protruding from the side of the pedal, so I didn't feel it in my foot. So really awesome pedal, I think great bang for buck. Reverb dropper post. I can't really say too much about the reverb, just because in the past I had a lot of reliability issues with them, but at the same time, I mean, it felt really good, and that new shift lever for the reverb also feels really good as well. So link in description to everything that I talked about, and if you guys have any questions at all, feel free to leave them in the comment section. Overall, Knolly, amazing job making a bike that you guys are passionate about, rides insanely well, and has a lot of ways that you can kind of customize it. So good job, Knolly. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, hit that like button if you want to see more videos like this. And if you're not subscribed to the channel, consider subscribing. That's it for me, Mo Awesome from Awesome MTB, and we'll see you guys next time. Until next time, you guys, ride awesome. Ew.